Greetings, Tony Mobley here. Happy to be with you. Conversations with Tony Mobley is live on YouTube, and we're here in the webinar. And it's not too late to come into the webinar and to participate in the conversation by adding your questions. And so we lift up that opportunity for you now. And so tonight, we're happy to have a new friend, but a good friend, Mr. Andy Carluccio. So before I allow him to share his story with us, I want to share with you why we're here. So as I said, my name is Tony Mobley, and I've been on a journey since I had a battle with cancer. And because of that journey, it has inspired me to not wait around for perfect scenarios to do things. And so I thought it was important to try to have some conversations around technology, but we talk about other things for people who don't necessarily look alike, to have meaningful conversations about technology and, as I said, other things. And so tonight we have the opportunity to have the president of Liminal, and I keep messing it up. I don't know why. Liminal Entertainment Technologies. And so, Andy, forgive me for that. And so we are excited to be here. And I'm going to tell you right away that there are going to be some technology things that will be shared tonight that will be mind-blowing. But that's not the principal reason why we're here tonight. The principal reason why we're here tonight is to find out how this young man was inspired to create his company, to do the things that he has done, and to sort of get a glimpse of what's coming. We really and truly want to get to know who Andy Carluccio is. And so that's why we're here tonight. And so if you want to know more about Liminal Entertainment Technologies, I encourage you to participate in office hours, AV Tech Talks, the after hours of office hours. In those places, you will have an opportunity to participate in the technologies that Andy is working on. But tonight, we are really focusing on getting to know the things that inspired him, the things that he had to navigate during COVID. So we want to find out about the person. So that's what we're here tonight to talk about. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the hands over to Andy. And I know I did not switch over hosts. And so let me do that.
All good. Tony, thank you so much for having me. I'm really humbled to be here, especially after the incredible series of guests that you've had on the show. I hope I can be 1% of what they have been and the stories that they have shared. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity to have a different type of conversation, something that I haven't had the opportunity to do actually in the places that we normally engage. We're talking a lot about the tech and things like that, and I'm certainly happy to do so tonight. But I want to take this moment to sort of acknowledge the work that's been done in the theater community and academic institutions and their theater departments, as well as some of the other institutions, religious and otherwise, that we've worked with and the people that we've met, and try to lift up some of those communities and the people that we've met on that journey through the framework of what we're doing here at Liminal. So I really, really appreciate you having me. I'm humbled to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, sir. We're so happy to have you. So at this time, we're going to do our lab. So inspired by Dr. Chris Clark, who has told me I have to call him Chris, that we do our labs. Originally, we started doing our labs at the end, but now we do the labs in the beginning, and because we want the labs to inspire the questions that this conversation will sort of produce. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Andy for the lab, and then we're going to, and then we'll go to the questions.
Sounds good. So in the sort of the context of our software and what we do, we make tools for Zoom. And what we try to do is, we always say that Zoom connects people and we connect Zoom. So we try to allow the Zoom platform to integrate with other pieces of technology that you might be used to using, like a Stream Deck or an ATEM, maybe vMix, software programs, QLab, Isadora, all these things that we talk about all the time on office hours and other communities that we use in the arts and things like that. We try to make Zoom a relevant part of that pipeline. And it started when we engaged in a theater community and tried to take the workflows that affected them to really create the different mediums of art, visually, audio, storytelling, really forms of storytelling, and bring Zoom into that pipeline. So what I'm going to show you tonight is our two products, Zoomosc and ZoomISO, briefly, and just give you a sense of what they do and how they allow us to control and talk to Zoom. And then I hope that maybe inspires some questions there, and then we can talk a little bit about the sort of how we got to this point and why you might want to do some of these things I'm going to show you. So I'm going to switch over to share my screen here, but I'm going to do it as a virtual webcam source. I hope that's all right. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Zoomosc out of the way. So the first thing I want to show you is Zoomosc. And I'm going to do that by showing you what looks just like a Zoom client, because at its core, Zoomosc is an instance of Zoom. And it looks and walks and talks just like a Zoom client, but inside of it, it has a communication system that allows it to talk to other pieces of software. And that is managed through this little sidecar application. You can find it on Mac and Windows, and it allows you to set up different settings that allow this protocol, this network-based protocol, to talk to Zoom and to talk to the other programs in your network. So what we're going to do in this example is just create a little widget, and we're going to make something that when somebody raises their digital hand inside of the panel, it's going to spotlight them. It's going to add them to a spotlight. And so we're just going to spend a minute making that little connection. So I'm using the Isadora Media Server. This is something that I used a lot when I was a projections designer, and I used it to make sort of different pieces of generative art, and we can talk a little bit about some of that portfolio maybe after this lab, but it's a really visual way of showing what Zoomosc can do. So
Andy, I'm going to interrupt you for just a quick second.
By all means.
So just for the sake of people who are not office hours, can you just give a real brief synopsis of what Isadora is?
Yes.
And why you might be using it with Zoomosc?
Absolutely. So Isadora is what we would call a media server, but it defines itself as a creativity server, and I think that's a much better definition. It's designed to be a visual environment where you're connecting nodes, and the nodes we call actors, and you connect them together to make different pieces of workflow. So you might have video effects that you're creating and sending out to a projector. You might have data coming in from a phone or from a button somewhere on your stage, and that can come in and affect it. You might have audio channels that are controlled. You might have connections to light boards and other pieces of equipment that Isadora controls and talks to all of those different programs and protocols. So for me, Isadora is sort of just a space to create. And it's kind of a weird way of doing things, maybe. I have a little bit of a different spin on how I use Isadora than maybe it was created for. But for me, whenever I'm trying to solve a problem, one of the first things I do is launch Isadora. And it doesn't matter what kind of problem it is. It could be, something I'm trying to do in my artistic life and some piece of media that I'm working on. It might be something very technical in a broadcast engineering space where I'm trying to get two things to talk to each other and figure out what to do. And with Zoomosc, it might even be, how do I create a certain type of experience inside of Zoom that there's no sequence of buttons I can click to make happen inside of the interface. So for me, Isadora is a canvas for problem solving. It's a place that I can just open up the program and spend some time in it. And generally speaking, I can usually figure out what I'm trying to do inside of it. So it's a sort of, back to the old Steve Jobs saying, of a bicycle for the mind. It's there to sort of accelerate myself and my thinking, and it's one of the the big gifts that I had from being involved in the theater community was that I learned that tool first, and it's helped me organize my thinking and all of that, and create some tools that hopefully can help other people. So that's what I'm going to show you.
Thank you, Andy.
Absolutely. So I'll switch over to the virtual source again, and when you first launch Isadora, it's sort of this blank canvas as I promised, and if you double click inside of it, you can create these actor nodes. So I know I'm going to be working with OSC, so I'm going to type in OSC, and I'm going to select this OSC multi-transmit node, and I'm going to zoom in quite a bit because it's kind of hard to see. So this is a little network node that allows you to talk to anything that can communicate with the Open Sound Control Protocol. And I'm going to kind of gloss over some of the technical stuff because we cover it in office hours quite a bit. So I'm just going to put in the UDP port 9090. I'm going to put in the command that I want to use, which is available in our API. That's going to be /zoom/username/add spot. And I'm going to take one input. I'm going to set it to the type text. So this just means that when I type somebody's name in here, so I'll go for I'm going to pick on Aaron here because I see your name right in front of me. Aaron space North Carolina. If I hit add spot to that, you see we just added Aaron to a spotlight. And if I want to unspotlight this, I can just duplicate the node, and I can say instead of add spot, I want to do unspot, and I can trigger it again. And now Aaron's not in the spotlight anymore. So we have this program now talking to Zoom, and it's starting to create some cuts. So we could do a lot of things from here. We could have keyboard shortcuts for each of these. So if I wanted to do that, because we talk about keyboard shortcuts a lot when we talk about like accessibility and making Zoom easier to use for certain events, the keyboard is something that hopefully pretty much everybody has in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, your computer's probably not too useful to you. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a keyboard watcher. And I'm going to say, okay, when I hit the A key, I want to spotlight Aaron. And when I hit maybe the O key, I want to take Aaron off. I'm just going to hook those up to the transmits, and those red lines are for. So I hit A, and we spotlight Aaron, and I'm going to hit O, and we take Aaron out of the spotlight. So just like that, we've created a little easy button shortcut on the computer to be able to spotlight somebody and unspotlight them. But this is the first half of using Zoom OSC. This is just sending commands to the program to get it to do things. The second half of the program is listening to Zoom OSC and getting information about what's happening in Zoom so that you can create connections between inputs and outputs. In Isadora, that's done through the communications tab and stream setup. And again, I'm not going to explain too much of how this is all built, but I do want to show you this just because it's a helpful little tool. So I know that I need to listen for an OSC input. So I'm going to type in /ZoomOSC/user/ I think it's raised hand, I believe is the API. You'd think I'd know my own API, but there's hundreds of commands, so I can't remember them all the time. I think it's raised hand, but I'll check my outputs to see that. I'm going to put that on channel 10. I'm going to go ahead and delete the current setup that we have, except for this node. Actually, I'm going to leave the unspot node there too to make it easy for myself. I'm going to open up an OSC listener, and I'm going to set that to channel 10 with 4 outputs. I'm going to turn that on and set it to type text. And I know that output 2 is going to be a username. So whoever raises their hand, their name will appear in output 2. So I clearly haven't picked the right name. So let's look at my output log here. Aaron, could you raise your hand again? All right, it is user hand raised. So I'm going to go up to here, stream setup. It's hand raised instead of raised hand. So I'm going to do hand raised like that. So can you lower and raise your hand again, Aaron? There we go. So now I'm getting your name in there so I can see the name of the person who raised their hand. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to add them to the spotlight. So I'm going to connect their name to the name of the person that we want to add to our spotlight. And then I'm going to do this little trick that I have with a text changed text comparator. So I want to see, did that name change? And if it did, I want to trigger the transmit. Now I typically will put a little trigger delay on that. I'm going to go ahead and do that here too. I know we're kind of flying through some of the Isadora stuff, so if you want to ask any questions about that, feel free. But I think the purpose is to show the experience versus the exactly how to do this. But now, Aaron, if you raise your hand, we should have you added to the spotlight. And we could do the reverse of that too. So I could copy all of this, and I could say, all right, I want to do the opposite now. So when he lowers his hand, I want to take him out of the spotlight to sort of complete the chain. So I'm going to go to the communications tab, stream setup, and I'm going to add something on channel 20, and that's going to be Zoomosc user hand lowered, I believe. I'll set this to channel 20, and then I'll hook this up just like I did before to trigger there.
We'll have it as 10.
Yeah, change your channel.
There we go. Thanks, guys. All right, so Aaron, go ahead and raise the hand again, and then lower your hand. And we still have you in there. What do we do? Oh, there it goes. Okay, just took a second. And now anybody can raise their hand, and I think this will still work. If anybody wants to try it. Yep, David, and welcome. And then if you lower it, it should send you back in a second. Yep, there we go.
Fantastic.
So we're creating.
So we have multiple hands raised now.
Yep, and then we're still able to add them together to the spotlight there. And they'll still work. So that's kind of the basics of things. It's our it's a system for creating connections between inputs and outputs. So that's Zoomosc, and you might be wondering, okay, well, what does that actually do for somebody? Well, it allows us to have stream decks set up where we can hit people's names and spotlight them to quickly cut between events happening inside of Zoom. It allows us to make control panels where we can see lists of names and search for the right person that we want and see if they're a co-host and make sure they have their video on. And if not, we can send them a message automatically and ask them to turn it on. It allows us to create these large control panels where we have hundreds of Zoom meetings in the cloud and tie them all back together to one place where we can manage all the meetings at once. It can let us control breakout rooms, do all these sorts of things. So it really depends on what you want it to be at the end of the day and how you want to format it. But it's just a simple connection to Zoom, inputs and outputs. So that's what Zoomosc is. And I don't know, Tony, if you had any initial questions on that, if you want me to move on.
I have tons of questions.
All right, go ahead.
What I want to do is I'm going to let David ask his question.
Just a quick one. If Isadora was your entry into this method of thinking, what was the learning curve for you? Or, for me, nodal programming is I don't get it yet. So for that kind of thing, how easy is it to grasp?
I'm a super visual person, so and then when I show you some of my past, I think that'll make that pretty clear. So for me, it was a good gateway to get into it. It was nice to be able to see the flow of inputs to outputs and all of that. But I will say that the first time I used Isadora, I actually wrote a paper in college about how much I hated it, and how much I couldn't stand the user interface, and I had all these problems, and it was driving me nuts. And I wrote a paper about it, and then I ate my words about a year later when I was using it for every single thing I was ever trying to do. So it grew on me after a while, but there's definitely that learning curve. I know, Carluccio, you've probably experienced something similar as well.
Yeah, I definitely experienced a learning curve when I got into it, and it's really scary because it's blanks. It's a blank page. But when I started to think of it like manifolds of information, manifolds in plumbing, where you turn on one line to get water to a certain place, and then you turn that off so you can get water to another place. It's like it's linear in that way, but it's not linear in the way in the way we think of editing video or cues that happen one after another. It's linear in the sense of this information goes from here to here. Now, do I need it to do something else before it gets to here? Yes. Okay, let me add one more thing in between it. So that's kind of how it works. And I would highly recommend, and I wish that somebody would have told me this, but I would highly recommend working from left to right, which I don't always do. So if you work from left to right and you keep things clean, you can kind of see the information flowing across the screen at some point. So also don't be afraid of it and play with it.
Okay.
You're not going to hurt anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I want to make some things real clear. So Andy is prolific in sharing his information on YouTube. I strongly encourage you to, when we finish our conversation tonight, to go to the YouTube, he produces YouTube videos on everything that he's doing. He is also sharing a great deal of information and actually doing some beta testing with After Hours. And that's 21 hours a day. And he's often there experimenting and testing things. And so please go and check that out. And so so Andy, I think you had something else that you wanted to share with us.
Really briefly, I wanted to show you what our other product does, Zoom ISO, which is a little bit of a different take on Zoom. And this is designed to help people get video out of Zoom and bring it into an ATEM or something like that so that they can produce the type of look that they want dealing with the video versus just the data. And so in this, I'm going to show you, I'm going to switch over to my Mac here. So I'm going to pull back up vMix, and then I'm going to cut back to my Mac. And I'll show you a little bit about what Zoom ISO does. So Zoom ISO is, again, similar to Zoom in the sense that it sits in a Zoom meeting just like Zoom OSC, and it has all of the Zoom OSC stuff inside of it, but it has a couple other things going on as well. And the main thing that it has is the ability to select participants and route them to outputs. And these outputs are both available as NDI and Siphon. And with Siphon, you can get out to SDI and get into a deck link workflow. You can go out to HDMI with the full screen monitor outputs, and again, get back into an ATEM mini if you want to get in there and do some work in that environment. And then NDI if you're working in vMix or something along those lines. So I can just select names from a drop-down list. I get to pick how many people I want. I can have automatic crops out of the gallery view if I want to do that with just a button press. So it's designed to kind of break the Zoom meeting down into its basic elements so that you can toss it back together the way you want it to look. So if I show you in vMix, I'll switch my screen back to a screen capture, and you'll get some vMix inception here. So here I have all my different sources I'm going to be able to use today, and I can see over here, these first 4 inputs are just the different NDI sources that are available on my network. So if I go in and I say, all right, I don't need 2 versions of Tlaloc, well, I do, but not right now. I can select somebody else from the drop-down list, and then here we got Marcus coming. So I can cut to this source and be full screen with any of the different people that I want here. I can use the multi-source engine, so I can go merge over to a look like that. And this is now with this blue background, and I have this animation moving between things. So, you know, really whatever you want in terms of the way that you want to style this. Zoom ISO kind of, again, breaks the call down so that you can build it back up the way that you want. So that's the spirit of that product, and that's something that we just released. And we hope that it helps folks in the live streaming community get their stuff out the way they want it to look.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I want you to feel free to share what you would like to share in terms of who is Andy Carluccio and how did he get to this place?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm standing on top of a mountain of privilege, and all of the people who helped me get to this point, I've been so fortunate to grow up in the area that I did, in the country that I did, with friends and family that I've had around me, and the communities that I've been embedded in. So I am, you know, anything that I've been able to reach, I've been able to do so by standing on so many people's backs who have helped prop me up and get me to this point. So I first want to acknowledge that. And I think that bearing that in mind, a big motivation for me has been that, you know, I think that, and it's one of the reasons I really love your show, Tony, is that, you know, I think that knowledge is both a gift, but it's also really a responsibility at the end of the day. It's a responsibility to do something with it and either teach it to others, pass it on, or use it to help your community. And you've been such a great inspiration, Tony, because of the stuff that you've been doing. And I've tried to reflect a lot of that in my life. And, you know, it's not enough just to you know, to learn about things and get the information in. That's the start. But really what it's for is to help others and to try to, you know, provide something back to the people who brought you here, so that you know, we all can grow as a community. So to that end, since I was, you know, 16 years old, I've been working a bunch of jobs. I started, first job was in a computer repair store where the guy said, hey, you come in here, you fix a computer, I'll give you $25 for each one you fix. I don't think he was expecting me to fix 20 of them in one day and take all of his cash, but nonetheless, that's how I started my first job, and it was probably highly illegal, but that's how we did it. And so I got this great access early on to all these different computers and all these different things that I was working on. So I got to just fix people's stuff for fun. And This was around the time that Facebook was going through a lot of changes with Facebook Live. And when that first came out, whenever you would live stream on Facebook, everybody, whether they were your friend or not, if they were somewhere in your proximity or you had some connection that could possibly make you relevant to that person, your video showed up in their feed. And so my boss at the time, after I'd gone through a couple different shops, had said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take our entire advertising budget and we're going to put it into producing a Facebook Live show where you're just going to sit in front of the camera, Andy, and you're just going to talk about the news. And good luck. Here's $100. Go figure it out. And that was our entire advertising budget. And just instead of promoting stuff on Facebook, just do a Facebook Live video every week so that it shows up in as many people's feeds as possible. So then I started producing a show when I was late in high school in my first year of college, where we just recapped the news every week. And that was great practice for me to just sort of figure out like vMix and all this other stuff. And I had never tried any of this stuff before. I had, I spent all the money on this one camera and a little, $25 lav mic. And I had this pop-up green screen that I borrowed that filled up my entire dorm room. And we just started producing stuff with virtual sets and things like that in vMix. And it was quite a lot of fun. And from there, I went on to work in some podcasting groups, and they started to do live streams and things like that around the same time. And I sort of in that process, I had decided that I wanted to take my love of computer science and my love of production and drama and theater and structure my major in my undergrad years to be able to do something like that. So I was a double major in computer science and drama at the University of Virginia, where I got my bachelor's degree. And that was huge for me, being able to have intersectional studies. The department wasn't so sure about that program and how that was going to work, but we were able to make a compelling enough case for it, and they let me do it. And I was able to take a bunch of theater technology classes while also working to build up my computer science skills. And it was going really well until March 2020 hits, right, last year, and we all get sent home. And every job that I had applied to immediately dried up. I lost my job. I lost, the contacts that I had, and more devastating than any of that, my friends and colleagues in the theater industry closed their venues to the world to keep our community safe. And they went home without a paycheck, and many of them, and a lot of them closed their doors and will never reopen them again. And that was a moment that was, I remember packing up the theater when we were leaving. We had one of these theater buildings that we had at UVA, and I was just taking out some stuff to bring it back. And I just sort of sat in the theater and looked at the proscenium arch with the fire curtain down and a whole show that was ready to open 2 days later that was never going to see the light of day. And I said to myself, we got to do something about this. Like this, there's too much art and love and humanity in these arts to let a lockdown prevent us from expressing that. And so I went home and we started working on Zoomosc that day. And I really good friend of mine, a colleague and mentor, Eamon Farrell, he called me up and said that he was working on a show with Bard College, and they were going to try to pivot it. Instead of canceling it, they wanted to bring it online. They wanted to do it through Zoom. And so they tried a bunch of different things. They tried Google Hangouts. It was a disaster. They tried WebEx. That wasn't working too well for them. And they landed on Zoom and said, okay, you know what? We got a bunch of settings here. We don't know what they do, but we can probably figure something out. So let's try Zoom. And this is early March 2020. And so I started, the whole concept of this production of Mad Forest was that they wanted to have a lot of precisely timed camera cuts and try to produce it like a film. So they were going to act live and do everything inside of Zoom, but they wanted to control originally the active speaker. They wanted to try to, fake it into cutting quickly between all these different sources so that we didn't have to see the person who was talking. We could see reaction shots and things like that. And that's what inspired me to start looking at the Zoom SDK. The Zoom SDK is the thing that makes Zoom so special to me, is that it's completely open and I can go in there and I can build something out that is completely the way I want it to look and the way I want it to work. So in the rehearsal room, I was the SDK designer. You have the lighting designer, the video designer, the projection designer. And I was the SDK designer. I was supposed to, the programmer in the artistic staff in the rehearsal room, listening to the director saying, okay, I need a way to be able to do these 3 spotlights in succession and all of that stuff. And so I was just sitting there inside of an IDE trying to get this thing to work and figure out that SDK.
And what is an IDE?
a development environment, a programming environment. So I was trying to figure that out, and it was the.
Can you give us the meaning of an SDK as well?
Yeah, software developer kit. Yeah, so this is something that Zoom puts out so that developers like myself can use the Zoom client in ways that they don't. So it'll, we're able to integrate it with other pieces of software or add effects to it or do really whatever we want within certain limitations. And that's what Zoomosc and Zoomiso are. They're Zoom SDK applications that allow us to modify and control Zoom. And that was, for me, it was born out of this artistic moment in the midst of COVID to try to figure out how can we not only just get together on Zoom and conference, but how can we actually create something with some sort of artistic value to it. So I'll show you a couple of things that I've worked on in my reel here. So pop back over to vMix here, and I'll show you a couple of things that we had done sort of in that moment. Let me pop back to this video here, and I'll show you a couple of different things that we did. So scroll over to Mad Forest here. So the result of this was a combination of Isadora and Zoomosc together to create these real-time effects and these precise spotlights between recorded media and live compositing. So everything you just saw was a real-time sort of segment from that show, where we're cutting based on the lines and the music, and then we're taking actors in separate homes and compositing them together so that they can have some sort of physical interaction in this view. We wanted to really break free of the gallery view, because that's something that you spend your whole day looking at that on different meetings. You don't want to be entertained looking at the same thing, right? So that's kind of where we started, and from there we went on to do similar projects. This is something we did with Tectonic Theater, which is a production of Las Aventuras de Juan Planchard, which was an international debut with a cast that was performing the play in Spanish and with these live English subtitles. It was a big undertaking that we used Zoomosc for. We went on to produce 4 shows with Moliere in the Park, where we kind of started off with just let's design Zoom really well, so some virtual backgrounds that match the costuming and like really focus in on the cameras and the lighting and the green screens to make sure it looks passable. And I think that was pretty cool. And then we went on to do productions that were more like actual broadcast centers, where we had Zoomosc and Zoomiso early drafts, tying everything together and bringing them into Isadora as individual sources and playing these real-time effects and distortion cues and things like that to try to make it more palpable. At the same time, we were working with an international community producing a live film called Vimalakurti. Vimalakurti involved a dancer in Amsterdam, a singer in Oregon, a director in LA, and a world-renowned calligrapher in the Hanzhou region of China, collaborating together in real time on Zoom. I'll give you just a little walkthrough of this gallery view here. So on the top left, you have the calligraphy feed. Next to the right of that is the director. Then there's the stage manager. Then there's the musician. There's the choreographer and dancer. Below that, row down. Then there's a camera on the face of the calligrapher. Live translations of what is being written inside of this ancient Chinese text, so that everybody else could know where we were in the project, kind of like the live script, and the musicians could look at that and figure out what to sort of improvise based on that, and the dancer would know kind of where in the movement he should be. And then we have some production cameras in my composited view. So you put that all together, and we have a view like this, where we have the actual production output is, Michael as sort of the dancer is the base layer, and then we bring in the musician, and then the annotation is this sort of composited layer with the calligraphy. So we can create some really cool effects in real time. I love that last shot there of
wow.
So.
Wow.
So that's
I'm saying
all
wow.
composited in real time there.
Amazing.
And we continued to do things similar to that, where we were just trying to mix people together and create some pretty trippy looking effects here and there inside of the Zoom platform for records and other. I love this one too. This was I'm getting ahead of myself, but this was a composited view that we did in September, where a challenge, we had these 2 musicians who were had to be socially distanced when they were performing this duet. And they're supposed to be facing each other and sort of in the rhythm of the piece. It's a very conversational moment. So what we did is we framed one of them against black, and then we took the crossbar on our switcher and put it halfway down. so that we had a live mix of the two of them. So this sort of holographic musician on the left,
70s style.
exactly right. So they look like they're playing to each other in that moment.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun. So those are the kind of things that we do, that we have been doing. We've gone on to build, some pretty large virtual event controllers. This is Sherman Patton's controller in Universe that is.
I'm gonna ask you to pause.
Yeah, absolutely.
George has been raising his hand for a minute. So go ahead, George.
Andy, you could leave your screen up. Can you just scrub back to one of your four shots, like your 4-ups?
Absolutely. Let me go and find that. Yes, this frame here. There you go.
So, Alex, this is not the one I was looking at, but Alex always talks about the simplicity of, when he started to do Office Hours 2.0, I was like, well, the design is just gray, but I'm looking at some of your designs here, and it got me thinking, do we really need to have these outlandish backgrounds that we use in everyday life for our client productions? I mean, what you're using here just looks so clean and natural. I know we're kind of going for a different look here, and it's theater, but what if everyday production can look like this? I mean, obviously there's production involved in cameras, a little bit of lighting, but I think this is some really good imagery. Interesting. It was good.
And it's one of my, my main beliefs is that broadcasters have a lot to learn from the theater community. And it's a kind of a group that gets looked over quite a bit because it's low budget and they're just trying to, throw things at the wall and see what sticks. But these are the kind of things that have been experimented with and worked on by sort of the New York underbelly of theater for decades. Since like the 80s, since the computers were first commercially available to people, artists have been trying to use them to create these types of experiences as long as they've had the option to do so. And so in this moment, for me, it was, again, a privilege to be able to come from the theater community, see what we did in these live productions, and then go over to the professional events production space and see what could we translate. Things like OSC, those are like the backbones of a lot of theaters, and they're not really commonly used in, high-end event broadcast, right? So bringing those workflows over have allowed us to tie a lot of things together.
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, watching you and your passion over the last few months since I've known you, and working with you on the Office Hours, and then seeing the work that you've done, it reminds me a lot of so I have a friend named Sheldon who was very close with Andy Warhol and a whole bunch of other people at the time, and he would say whenever I would make something like similar to that, he would say, "Oh, Andy would love that," right? And I think, and the reason I say that is not just the aesthetic quality, but the tools, right? This is a tool these are all tools for creativity, and they have creativity at their heart, which means that you get a different look and you get a different quality about them than you do in like a broadcast tool, right? And it's not good or bad, it's just different. And I mean, it certainly speaks to a part of me that, I feel like is, yearning for theater, right? But it's also, it's just really beautiful, like that these enabling things can exist and that people can express themselves now with things that they couldn't express themselves with before as easily. Right. And I think, that's really important. And I really appreciate the way you talk about it.
It's a human desire to connect. And and while we had to be distant, for the safety of our communities, it doesn't change the fact that we're wired to be, a community creature. Right. And that's why Absolutely. I think that, Zoom out of the box serves a certain logistical need that we have to communicate. But I really do believe that it can serve as the foundation for the types of connections and the types of expressions that are beyond just like, hey, we got to sit in a meeting and talk about how to build this thing, right? Or how to manage the books this month. We can actually try to have a real human connection.
But actually, it lets you get out of the logistical head and into the creative head, right? Like exactly. Just thinking about logistics is not particularly useful, right?
Go ahead, John.
Can't hear
you.
How about this? A little better now?
Yes.
Okay. We hear the phrase Zoom fatigue. And I don't think people get fatigued at watching your creations. Is the Zoom fatigue really a lack of creativity of our Zoomers? And then follow on is, how could you see what you've done for theater to help the broader general use of Zoom?
Absolutely. So taking your first question there on Zoom fatigue, I do think it's a hitting the same stimulation over and over and over again is like the definition of fatigue, right? But when you're in a visually complex space, you can sometimes get sensory overload, and I recognize that that's a thing. But the like we did that Vimla Kirti show at 3 a.m, because we had to do it in China time, right? So and I never felt tired for a moment, working on it. And I know for me, like as an artist, it's invigorating, and like I want to be participating in that. But I do believe that it's the diversity of thought and vision and voice, that those things and the sort of the cleanliness of that communication and the signal to noise ratio that Alex talks about, right? Those are the things that when you get those right, this starts to feel a lot more like sitting in a room together and having a conversation. And I think when you hit that formula, Zoom fatigue is sort of irrelevant at that point. And I think that's sort of the key there. In terms of how we can help the broader community, that is the sort of the thesis of why we made Liminal right there, John, is that we tried these things out, figured out how to do it, and now we packaged them up into products and shot them out the door and started providing services so that we could try to help and bring that feedback back to Zoom, right? And show them like, hey, we're out here doing this thing. Is there a workflow that we can use to try to get to that point? And I think we've seen the beginnings of a lot of that. I think Zoom Events is a step in the right direction. Zoom Apps, the right direction as well. Bringing those things right inside of the Zoom experience, I think that's huge. And it was when we first started this, and to this day, most of Zoom OSC's functionality is something we give out for free. The entire first year, in 2020, was you couldn't buy Zoom OSC for me. I wouldn't let you, right? We just give it out, and and I went quite a while without taking a paycheck, and I still haven't. I reimbursed a couple of bills that were starting to become pretty onerous, but really haven't taken any money from this. I worked a lot of jobs growing up, and I was able to sort of save that money again, thanks to being able to get a good loan at a good interest rate to go to school, right, and things like that. I was able to manage that, and so what I wanted to do with that was put it back into the community and try to see what I could do. So I think that that's been our motivation, has been to try to put it back in the community and enhance the platform as a result.
So go ahead, Chris.
I wanted to suggest that we rebrand Zoom fatigue as meeting fatigue or boring meeting fatigue, just to put a sharp point on it, an exclamation point. It's not Zoom that wears me out. It's meetings and the rituals and mind-numbing familiarity of the way meetings work is what wears me out. I had another point that's part question and part speculation for Andy, that as I listened to your narrative about the development of Zoom OSC because you had a gun at your head. You were right in the situation. You had to make this stuff work. Somebody said, Andy can make it work. And then Andy wound up there at the rehearsal or at the read-through feeling like you had to make it work. And you did, and you took it 7 steps farther, of course. But it seems to me that this could be a quasi model for developers, for startups, and quote, there are several books and TED Talks and the rest of it about how to take your idea and how to get out of the office and talk to future users and so forth and so on. But this is much more vividly another path, it seems to me. It may be that I'm uninformed, that this is kind of...
You're not uninformed.
A common story, but I think it's an uncommon story. and I think its power goes far beyond the wonders that you've created and co-created with a team. And your team wasn't the typical, well, we need a finance guy and we need an engineering guy and we need a content guy. And they're all guys, by the way. I like your scenario better. I think I'd sign up to be the janitor at your operation just to be close to what I imagined that story was like. And I know there were low points too.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that, something that I've held really close to sort of my mission statement. I actually had it printed up behind my monitor as a reminder, was that the distinctions between technology and art are arbitrary. I really try to resist this whole left brain, right brain, what mode am I in right now? I try to throw all of that out. And that was the key to my being able to be successful in school, was to stop thinking about subjects and think about learning, right? And think about holistic execution of ideas. Because for me, it was like, I think and it's somewhat intuitive, and I'll show you some stuff for my reel that will probably look you'll pretty plainly be able to see in my work, like how being a computer scientist has influenced my art. But the truth of it is, the more substantial influence has been how being an artist has influenced my ability to program. And that was something that I spent a lot of time in college trying to iterate on group projects, was to think about when we have an algorithms assignment, we're trying to figure something out, think of it like theatrical devising, and have the type of conversation that artists have in a room when they're trying to figure out how to make a certain look or make you feel a certain feeling. Approach that mentality to a very technical subject, and that's where out of the box ideas are coming from. That's where sitting trying to solve a puzzle, which is basically what I view programming as a lot of the time. That's where that creative inspiration comes from. It's from practicing that, and not just it's not enough just to sort of bet on having that random creative thought. You have to train yourself you have to prime your mind to be in a position to think like that. And that's what the arts have done for me, as it's positioned me in the ability to think that way and to encounter those ideas. So it really has been a bidirectional benefit, this synergy. And I completely resist any sort of segmentation as often as I can.
Go ahead, George.
So Andy, for a person that's been in this industry for over 20 years, I've seen a lot. Obviously, the industry is moving super fast right now. Office hours is moving super fast from where we were the beginning of the pandemic last year. For folks that are sitting around right now, I know a lot of us are using vMix and ATM minis. How do we tie all these things together? I'm just going to show this. It's a piece of hardware, but a lot of us experiment what we call our home labs. So right now, I'm not going to put it in focus. It's going to take my camera out. So essentially, this is just a couple of micro converters. Some folks might be a little bit afraid to say, I'm going to tie vMix and all of these things together. So what that's going to allow me to do is be able to tie out of my deck link, put a few inputs into vMix and put inputs into the ATM mini also, so I could play around with all those pieces. And I think that's what we're seeing with Isadora, Zoomosc, Zoom ISO, is being able to play with all three of those things at the same time, and even Streamweaver. So, I know Tony's premise of this show is, getting folks to, because we all struggle with it, I don't know everything, but I know a lot. But how do you get folks to really harness these completely different pieces and still maintain their daily work life? Or a lot of us here are freelancers or individual owners, but how do we try to pull all of this together right now? Office Hours has to do a great job with it, but how do we, from your perspective, how do we pull all this together?
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's like putting on a show. It's how I try to think about it. You have your, the carpentry shop has to be, building the sets, right? But then they have to be thinking about the next show that's coming up in rotation at the same time. So I try to think about how we solve those problems there. And for me, what that's boiled down to in a lot of what we do is, the front end experience. Like, how do we educate and provide material to the user so they don't have to spend a lot of time digging through our APIs and figuring all this stuff out? How can we, that's why we shot 13 YouTube videos in one day about how to use Zoom ISO and literally walk through every single step. We're trying to do the work for you so that it's just follow the guide and hook it up and it's good to go. While at the same time having this big backlog of advanced options that if you really want to dig in, you can get your hands dirty. For me, it's been like we've spent this summer really focused on really good like pick up and play experiences. So we've made a lot of Isadora interfaces, a lot of companion presets, things like that you can just download, follow these exact 5 steps, and you'll be at exactly the same position that I have with my Stream Deck. So those are the kind of things, just packaging everything that we've done and putting it together really well so that it can be exported out and just picked up by another person without knowing all the bells and whistles and the whole story and how we got here and all these commands and all of that. What are the minimum number of things you need to know in order to be able to get started? And we're trying to reduce that every single time we do an update.
So I see you, Ray. I just want to interject that we're going to go to the questions very soon. I need you guys to vote on the questions. The panelists and the attendees, please vote on the questions. And based on your vote, the questions will get priority. And the other thing I wanted to mention, Andy, is are you comfortable sharing some of your community work? We talked a little bit about your work and with Bangladesh, and I'm not, whatever you want to share along that line of community service and work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you.
No, totally. And this is, again, these are some of these formative projects for me, and I'm excited to share some of them with you. So by a very strange coincidence, when I was 18 years old, I had the opportunity to be the producer for the Kalpana Performing Arts Group in Northern Virginia, which is a Bangladeshi community of basically a performance company. And it happened to be that somebody I was working with in IT knew that I had some basic experience with theater and projectors, and that I had been sort of acting in community theater spaces for a little bit. And they said that they needed a new technical producer, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try, and had no idea what I was getting myself into and knew nothing. So it was an opportunity for me to really learn really fast. And this was 2015, 2016, 2017 was my time there as their technical producer. So I'll show you some of the stuff that we did and some of the stuff I learned in working on it. So this was a production called Palki, and Palki was the kind of a coming of age story that was an original sort of Bangladeshi tale. And it was sort of this surrealist play that involved a lot of projection work. So it was a lot of fun for me to design the projections for this and to go through the process with the community that I am not a member of, but sort of I was honorarily involved in, to try to figure out how to make work that was relevant to them and use my skills sort of at their disposal and their service. So I'll show you right now on screen just a little bit of the clips from that, and then I'll talk about how we actually did this. Let me scroll back here. So Bangladeshi culture is really strongly based around like the water and sort of the marshland. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but from what I gathered from my time working with them, it was the sort of the lush green image of Bangladesh, especially for immigrants who were no longer available to have, to open their door and look out and see that, was something that was really, really important to look at. So what we did is we sat down with a bunch of artists basically in this big warehouse, and we had people create these watercolor images. And we had a little HP scanner, and as they finished their painting, we threw it on the bed, slammed the door down, hit scan at like the highest DPI we could find to get a really clear, crisp image in. And then we absorbed that, and then we started photoshopping it, and we started putting it in After Effects, and we started animating it. And that created this big bank of layers and materials that we could start to play with, that were generated by the community, inspired by their own artwork and their own art styles, but then sort of twisted and reimagined in sort of a digital way for them to be reprojected as backgrounds and things like that. So this is one of my favorite shots, was this sort of silhouetted moment where they have sort of the hut layer that was drawn by one group, and then these sort of just these splashes of trees and green. And this is all thrown together in Photoshop and then played out through QLab. And the lighting design really saves this look because it ties the whole thing together and creates the silhouettes and the natural lighting for all of that. And for me, at the end of the day, this was ultimately a film project. Here we shot this in a sunflower field where all the sunflowers had died, which was much to the director's surprise, but we moved forward with it anyway. And we took an ultra wide lens and we sort of walked through this this shot at the end of the play where she's walking forward through this field in slow motion, and then we took the set design to sort of span that ultra wide image over all of the displays to bring them together, and at some points we would segment them. But what I realized in doing this, and this is sort of a place where I have to recognize sort of my own deficiency, was that I was taking this work and I was then taking it in sort of the European style of theater that I had sort of grown up in and understood. So I was taking all of it, but I was still bending it at the end of the day in a direction that maybe wasn't as natural for the type of work that we were trying to present. So a year later, we went back and did a production called One Mic, which was an evening of storytelling, basically, where it was working with the different members of the community to create a sort of an education bank for public speaking. And so they wrote out their stories. They met with the directors over the course of several months, and then we sat in the background and tried to help them take their personal photos and media and tie that together into a live broadcast that could reach their home members in Bangladesh. So that was sort of flipping it on its head and turning it into more of this roundtable storytelling that was more of a natural thing than this proscenium presentation talking at the community. And depending on how long I can go for ages about how that came together. But so One Night was really presented as an evening of storytelling that we tried to cover, where we were sort of serving as the broadcast directors and using projections again to help enhance the story, but do it around a meal and do it in sort of a dressy up kind of Hollywood style way that they were excited about, and that was a lot of fun. And that was sort of the turnaround moment for thinking about how we relate with the community, and how as an outsider we can try to look in and serve them without culturally appropriating their entire project, right? So that was a really important thing for me to learn, and we picked that up. In post-COVID world, or not post-COVID, but after COVID hit, I came home, I was taking care of family, and the first groups that we reached out to when we started were the local church, the local school, and trying to figure out, okay, what do they need? And so I sat down with the principal, who happened to be my neighbor, and they said, what is this Zoom thing? How does it work? And we just sat for 3 hours and talked about how Zoom works and, how the school could structure their meetings and things like that. And we were just doing this for free, just try to help out our neighbors and friends there. The local church, obviously they couldn't gather anymore, so we took a bunch of GH4s that we had just sort of collected as we had been working on different film projects over the years, and put them on tripods and put them in a chapel, and took an old Roland switcher that I had rolled out and tried to figure that out. And that was, again, another accelerant for me. Eventually we scaled that up and began to do more permanent installations and things like that, and thinking about not just what do we have to do in this moment, but what can we do. Again, I think that that's also sort of a theater mentality, whereas if you look at virtual theater as a glass half empty, you're only going to be disappointed. But if you look at it as a glass half full to create a new form, you're only going to see opportunity. And I think that applies to education as well, and even houses of worship and the way that they can reach people and have community-based engagement. Certainly was a huge transition moment for us. So we've tried to carry that mentality into the projects that we've worked on since then.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Ray, I apologize. Go ahead and ask your question, Ray.
Yes. What I found interesting, Andy, is you were faced with a problem. And as a result, you created a project and you dived in. And I'm sure you had to learn a lot of new things very quickly. What I would ask of you is being dumped into the deep end of the pool in a project and having to do multidisciplinary project. What was your learning speed in that environment versus the educational environment of lecture and labs? And might the education system learn something from this?
Yeah, I might upset a couple people here when I tell you that in my first 3 weeks at home, where I was focusing pretty much entirely on building this company and kind of writing my thesis with my right hand while my left hand and my head were pointed in the other direction, I wrote one of my friends that said, yeah, it was time for me to leave school. I was like, yeah, we kind of did it. We kind of met that cap. Was kind of maybe holding back more than it was helping at the end there. But for me, yeah, it was enormous and incredibly anxiety inducing at the beginning to try to sit in this mountain of stuff. And I had some programming experience, but I had never taken on something like that before, and certainly not with the feeling like if and again, I put this on myself, nobody was telling me this, but I felt that if we weren't able to produce what we were producing, people were going to lose their jobs and their livelihoods. So there was a lot riding on that, right? So for me, the only way to get by that was to take it one bite at a time. And I still try to do this when I'm tackling a huge programming problem that I don't
Sorry, did you just say you were doing this? That is brilliant. Like, we need more people to say that. You said, I felt like if I wasn't doing this, people were going to lose their jobs. You didn't say, I did this because I needed a job. You didn't think about what you were needing. You thought about what your community needed. And I'm sorry, that was pretty profound.
They've given me everything, the generosity that I've had from the theater community. I learned Dante by being brought to a bar with one of my my mentors and working on their project, where they needed, individual contributions to all these headsets and things like that. And they just coached me through the entire thing. And they paid for all that, they just did it. And they never asked for anything, just for me to be there and to learn and to help where I could. And there's a lot we could talk about when it comes to like theater and what's going to happen with it. I know that there's some questions on that, and I'll have some hot takes when we get there for sure. But like, I don't know. I feel like I'd be running at like a quarter speed if I was thinking about myself, and the motivation comes from like the impulse to want to engage and give back. Like that to me is so much like more of a motivator. Like I don't even like feel an appeal for anything else other than that. It could be just that, that sort of that marketing technique of like, okay, like give them a little chocolate when you walk in the door so you can sell them a $50,000 encyclopedia subscription, right? Like, that reciprocation. But that's how theater thrives. It's like, the lighting designer gives you, some idea on your projection that you then give texture to their lighting design. Like it's a collaborative process, and it doesn't feel like generosity. It just feels like what you do. So that's been huge. But to Ray's point about like, how do I tackle an enormous problem like that? If I try to even conceive of the entire problem, it's overwhelming and anxiety inducing. So I try to think of like, and I was dealing with this today too, is like, okay, I have a huge, load of compiler errors, half the features I don't know what to do. And, all right, let's find the first one. How do we solve the first problem? And then how do we solve the second problem, and then the third problem? And eventually, if you do that for enough amount of time, you'll have eaten the elephant, right? And so that's the only way that I've been able to approach this. If I try to solve it all in one fell swoop or learn everything that I didn't know, it's way too much. But if I can just figure out like, why is this not working, or how would I go about that, or how do I fill this gap in my knowledge here with this 5 minutes of this YouTube video? There's a YouTuber, Louis Rossman, who talks a lot about how he got over like procrastination and things like that. And it was by just like making sure that no matter what he did, he achieved like one simple task a day. Like if he had to do all this, massive amount of billing stuff, he would just make sure that he could log in, and he wouldn't try to, if he forgot his password, that's for tomorrow. But like he would try a password on one day and log in just to make sure that he was moving somewhere, had some sort of inertia, because it's much harder to start moving from being stationary than it is to accelerate once you're moving. So just so long as you just keep taking a step forward, right? That's been how I've tried to attack a lot of that.
Thank you, Andy, so much. We're going to go to the questions, and Chris, I agree with you. So yes, absolutely. Talak, let's go with the first highest voted question.
Our first question is from an anonymous questioner who said, can we show Magic Chat as a way to make Zoom-based discussion or event more inclusive using Zoomosc? Understanding if this isn't possible at the time, is a use case like this also helpful for people with accessibility issues, as has been suggested by others, or could it do more? Are there other accessibility use cases for what Zoomosc can do?
So I'll tackle the last part of that first, then Tolok, maybe I can pump it over to you to show how Magic Chat works. But the accessibility is an area where I get very emotional talking about Zoomosc, because I've seen a lot of like incredible community projects around it. It's one of the things that happens when you try to open up Zoom a little more. Like I learned how much people were like relying on shortcuts and like trying to like build solution on top of solution on top of solution to try to get their accessibility needs accomplished. Whereas if just exposing everything at the end of the day, it was, I've seen some crazy things where people who didn't have faculty of their hands were able to interact with Zoom with MIDI foot pedals, that they got for like for musical purposes, and then we showed them how to like translate that into OSC and then use that to like hit a foot pedal to unmute and hit a foot pedal to spotlight yourself and do those sort of things was really cool. ASL has been another huge or sign language in general, actually internationally, has been a huge implementation of Zoom OSC as well, because back in the day it was really easy before all this multi-spotlight stuff. We were able to do things like look at this person but hear audio from this other person, and there were some productions that were happening in Europe that were taking a lot of leverage of that. We also have I can't talk too much about this because of some HIPAA stuff, but there's a lot that we do in telemedicine overseas, and it's really cool. It's really cool what like lowering the bar to entry between patients and their healthcare providers, especially when they have extenuating circumstances that can make that more challenging online. So it's an area that I'm not an expert in for sure, but it's an area that I'm really committed to supporting as much as we can. We have limits, of what we can do inside of the architecture of the Zoom platform, but when we can think of something, or anytime somebody writes me and says like, how are we trying to solve, this accessibility issue, we do our best to see what can happen there. So yeah, it's absolutely something that we think about. And we think there's a lot of possibility for it, and we've seen some cool stuff done with it. Floke, I don't know if you want to tackle the Magic Chat part of that.
So we recently, this weekend, with the help of Andy and Aaron and many others, put together a thing we're calling Magic Chat, or Webinar Chat in this case. If we could show the gallery view just so that we can see that, or maybe even spotlight the webinar chat for right now, that would be great. What it does is it takes the latest chat and it pulls it out of Zoom OSC and brings it into Isadora and then plays it out to a Zoom attendee. And so what it does is it allows for people to not necessarily have to be looking at the chat to see that somebody in the chat has said something, and they might, and I think that can bring forward a whole community of people that may or may not want to be on camera and may or may not want to be on mic. And the way that it works, well, the other thing that it does is if somebody would come into the meeting, it will display that they've showed up. And the way that it worked is pretty simple. I don't think I would like to take the time right now to show the actual patch. I can if that's what everybody wants, but I feel like the discussion is deeper than that right now. If you feel that you would like to take a look at that, come to the Zoom webinar for Conversations with Tony Mobley, and stay at the fellowship hour at the end, and we'll look through those things and talk about them in depth. And if somebody can do some chatting right now, we've got it spotlit so people can see kind of how it works. What happens here is it just stays there for 180 seconds, I think, and then fades out. In other situations, in other instances of this project, we have it change colors so that people know that a chat has stayed there and hasn't been responded to. I mean, that's not really why we did it. We did it because for like 10, 15 different reasons. But in this case, I didn't want to do that because we're in more of a show version here and instead of a meeting. And so I didn't want there to be a bunch of color changing happening and distracting people. So, but it was very easy to make that change, just pull those things out of there. So I can talk more about this later.
Thank you, Talak, and thank you, Andy. Next question.
All right, that's me. Mason Lancaster asks, how can someone contribute to and help you with your work?
Best thing you can do is help somebody else. So if you've figured it out, pay it forward is the best thing I can say. I'm not crazy interested in money right now. I don't have a way for people to donate to us because I'd rather people make donations of time versus money. We do have commercial products. We use that to support our developers, and we were able to take care of our people with that money, and that is sufficient. And what I would ask is that, as you are working through and figuring it out, to help those around you, and if our tool helps you solve a problem and you think it might help solve somebody else's problem, to mention it, just to share what we're doing with other people, whether it's in a commercial context or not, doesn't really matter to me. But if somebody's struggling with Zoom and you feel like we have an opportunity to help them with Zoomosc or Zoom ISO, just letting them know that, I think would be what I would ask. That's a great way to support us.
Fantastic. Next question.
The next question is from Ken Jordan in Surrey, UK. Can this also be used if an attendee raises their hand? Can they be brought into the panel?
Yes. So we have an auto emitter that I made for office hours that you turn on a little switch and it waits for the raised hand event, and then it hits them with a promote event. And when that happens, it just sort of brings everybody up, and then they're here. And then you turn it off when you start your show. So absolutely, yeah. I've made that before. It is quite a bit of fun.
Fantastic. Next question.
The next question is from Mason Lancaster again. How does the chat window work? Could you demo that? We did a bit of demoing that, and we will do some more under the hood at the end here.
Absolutely. Next question.
Roscoe Jones asks, how will the theater be stronger due to this forced break?
Yeah, so I got some hot takes on this one. So here we go. I think that true theater will be stronger, and I think that those who have looked at this moment again as an opportunity have created things that are truly going to carry us forward. I think that what COVID has done is it has suppressed, to our benefit, a lot of the commercialization of theater, which is something that I have a lot of problems with. Broadway is extremely expensive and is not accessible to people, and yet it's people's entire perception of what theater is. And COVID, when Broadway decided that they were too good to try live online stuff, and they didn't want to risk, tainting their image by trying to do something that was less than this grandiose, expensive experience, what actually ended up happening is that the media that people consumed was work created by these independent, I call them the New York underbelly creators, right? The performance companies and ensembles and community theaters. They suddenly turned to the people who were producing work and gave them the attention, right? So when we worked with Moliere in the park, when they produced work in the park, they could only sit 200 people in front of them, right? They produced their online show and they had 20,000 people in their opening weekend attend. That is a shift in the public perception of what theater is and what theater can be, right? And so I actually not to say anything to people who who work on Broadway or who are actually trying to give and are engaged in that and who have achieved at that level. I support that, but the sort of establishment of theater and its commercialization and the way that people in that sector treat each other and treat the people who work for them, I'm not anxious for that to come back, to be completely frank. I kind of hope that this was, if theater dies, it's by its own hand and it will have deserved it. True theater is, this community engagement that will survive forever because it's based on a human need to connect. I think that there are certain projects that occur, at the Broadway level that are certainly in tune with the moment and in touch with what they need. But Broadway and that structure as a whole, and the way that people. I think more than anything, it's just the way that people are productized and the art is sort of productized is what I take issue with there. where it's you're not a creative, you're a sort of an element and a sort of contained object in that system. I think that the online theater has sort of broken that open, where the actors are suddenly technicians and are also, you know, engaging in the art in a different way, and it's sort of broken down those barriers as well. But for me, the largest, you know, some of the largest challenging groups that we've worked with have been professional, like, you know, commercial theater companies. The way that they treated their employees at home versus the way that like community groups and academic institutions banded together to try to get through a moment was such a stark contrast that I really don't want to see some of it return.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy, for that. Before I ask for the next question, Talak, I'm just curious, do we have any YouTube questions?
Not right now, we don't.
Okay, next question.
An anonymous attendee asked, please talk about the adoption of Zoom OSC in the worldwide magician community. How did that come about, and how far can a user like that go in the future with this tech?
Well, I'm excited to share with you that tomorrow, Felipe Nardi from Maestro, who built the Zoom OSC integration for magicians, will be on office hours as a special guest tomorrow. So we'll spend a whole hour talking about this tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. Felipe is great. As a primer, what he did is he took Zoom OSC and created a front end for it that was optimized for magicians. So when you sign up for his service, you get a Stream Deck in the mail and a flash drive. The flash drive has his software on it that is completely sort of skinned up and uses the terminology and has like presets for all the different kind of like elemental tricks that go into a magic show. And then the Stream Deck buttons have like little animations of like, you know, hit this button, it will randomly unmute 5 people during an applause section, so it sounds just good enough for live applause without unmuting anybody. Then tap it again and it'll shut them up. Or, you know, having a another button to be able to scroll through participants. Just tap, look at the next person, pin the next person, pin the next person to your local view, then pick the audience member you want and spotlight them with another press. Like that's what he built on top of it as sort of one-man show, magician at home production groups. We've worked with fabulous magicians like Trig Watson and other groups like that who have done some just really, really fabulous stuff on top of Zoom OSC. And it's one of the things that is most exciting to me because it puts smiles on people's faces and it surprises them and it twists Zoom in a way that like, I think brings a lot of joy to people. So I'm super impressed with the way that they approach it and how they make it happen. So definitely check out Felipe and Maestro tomorrow in the second hour on office hours. He's going to be great.
That's a scoop.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right here on Conversations with Tony Mobley.
How did you get it? How did they find you?
Yeah, it was you know, they were there's a couple, I don't know exactly like what the moment was for them, but they had started to try to hook into the Zoom SDK, looked at it and said, nope, not not today. And then looked and came across Zoom OSC and said, okay, it's a lot easier to integrate with Zoom OSC than it is to try to build our own end-to-end solution. And then what we did is we said, okay, let's make it so that it's all white labeled. So, you know, your customer doesn't go buy Zoom OSC and then buy your platform and figure out how to connect them. We just provide you a certain volume of Zoom OSC. You call it Maestro with your front end on it, ship it up in a flash drive and a Stream Deck in the mail. And they participate in like a 2-week education workshop as well. It's really cool, the education stuff that they do. And that's the model that they take. So they kind of came to us through Zoom OSC and through finding like that we're a Zoom API that people were using in the theater community. There's enough crossover between magic and theater that there's a lot of cross communication there between the artists who kind of wear both hats. So
fantastic. So we have seven questions left in about looks like 12 minutes. So we're going to move a little bit more swiftly. Next question.
Let's do the yes and no questions first.
No, we got to go by the votes. How about the cloud? Will Andy be making this stuff to the cloud as well?
We already do. Yeah, we have
an anonymous attendee, by the way.
The webinar chat in after hours, at least, is already running in the cloud. Zoom OSC on Windows, you know, which is where most of the cloud stuff is done, does run in AWS. And we've had events that have had hundreds of meetings in the cloud tied together with Zoom OSC and going back to central Isadora interfaces that are also in the cloud. So absolutely, cloud. We definitely agree with that. The only thing we don't currently offer for the cloud is Zoom ISO, because Zoom ISO is Mac exclusive, but we are working to port it to Windows hopefully this fall, and then yeah, cloud right away as soon as it's ready. It's definitely something that we're looking into.
Fantastic. Next question.
What can Zoomosc do for event security, like the dreaded Zoom bombing or other bad Zoom stuff?
Yeah,
Again,
definitely.
from an anonymous person.
One button solutions to deal with things. We do make security dashboards with Zoomosc, where it's like as you admit people, it puts them on sort of a blacklist that you can sort of see, like, how long have they been, under this certain security policy, and have they not caused a problem, then they could have go on the whitelist, and that allows them to turn their video on and all of that without triggering an alarm or something like that. So we've done some of those for like large scale webinars where there's like, classified information being shared between companies and all of that stuff, and they absolutely need to make sure that people rename themselves to the name that they're expecting them to be named before they can participate with audio or video. We have little things that like force you back into the waiting room until you join with the name that we're expecting you to join with. We've had one button solutions to be able to lock down the meeting. Now Zoom has that with the security panel, but we used to, we had sort of a bunch of sequences of Zoomosc actions you could use to like suppress everybody's audio and video if there was a problem, stopping, all that kind of stuff. So definitely, it's a tool that we've used for good Zoom moderation, and security is definitely part of that.
Next question.
Another question from anonymous attendee. Having already done such amazing things so early in life, where can Andy go next? What is the next mountain to conquer, giant to slay, or hopes for the future? Any thoughts for the panel as well? Any thoughts from the panel as well?
I'll say for my part, I feel like I'm like just trying to get started at this point. Like I don't necessarily view myself as particularly achieved. What I'm trying to do is like get started and get going. And I hope that, we can do the kind of things that we're doing in this community and scale it. Like that's what I want to do, is I want to be able to just like, provide these solutions for, larger and larger projects as we go. And I hope that I'm able to, continue to try to be of service to the types of things that we're doing here, and take the lessons I learned from, the early days in the theater community and try to branch that out into professional spaces, and but also kind of hook it back to the arts as often as I can, because that's kind of my watering well. I keep going back there, and it gives me kind of renewed energy to go out and do what we're doing in professional spaces.
Fantastic. I'm going to hold my tongue for right now. Next question.
Okay. AV Trainer asks, please, can you talk more on how to connect to the Zoomosc community to help others? Community is always key.
Absolutely. So the best resource by far is to join our Slack group. So we have a Slack group called Liminal Power Users. It's got over 1,000 people in it. And these are people who range from teachers who are just figuring out how to use Zoomosc and a Stream Deck to better manage their class, to students in their theater departments who are putting on a play, all the way up to like high-end broadcast professionals who are trying to do like, the nightly news. So there's everybody there. And what's great about it is that we've really tried to cultivate it to be a space of sharing information between people. So I've seen great things where, a student will come in and say, hey, I got this show. I don't really know how I don't really understand QLab that much. Can somebody pop in? And then somebody who just did like an off-Broadway run of a show with 50,000 QLab cues jumps in a Zoom meeting with them, and that's their first QLab experience. Like, what a better way. So, we've tried to cultivate a community that reflects the type of style of company that we try to be. And so if you want to join that community, you just go to our website and hit the Slack button, and it'll let you sign up, and you can join in there and engage in the conversation. It's also kind of a de facto support form as well. So if you have questions about the products, we're pretty fast at getting answers out there as soon as we can. So we do try to provide a lot of support through that area as well. But our goal for that community is to be really, truly a community vision driven form of sharing information where there's no sort of minimum requirement to come in the door. But we also recognize that by making it a support place, that's where we attract sort of a lot of the high end brainstorming and all of that helps percolate down to help everybody. So we've tried to kind of structure it that way, and so it's a little eclectic, but it's definitely a good group.
And the website is liminalet.com.
That's correct.
liminalet.com. Next question.
Next question is from an anonymous attendee. What can Zoomosc do for DEI in Zoom meetings?
I'm going to assume that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in one of the things that I'm most proud of with Zoomosc is that for the first 8 months or so, every project, every main community theater project that we engaged in as Liminal and with Zoomosc was a New York Times Critics Pick and was produced by a community of color. And that was a huge change in what used to be winning those awards in the New York Times. And it's because I take my hat off to Zoom for being accessible. It's not perfect. We still have, internet. I mean, talk about built-in equality. Look at outage maps and how, and what speeds are available in certain communities. You draw the neighborhood lines right there, right? Like, holy cow. But so there's still a lot of ways to go for sure. But if you can get them in Zoom, you can suddenly get them into a professional production versus, having to have them, take a day off and drive all the way out to the studio or whatever that is, or, book a night in an expensive hotel or something like that before they can be on set or any of that stuff. If we can ship them, the minimum spec, and we've shipped out hardware kits and laptops and DSLRs and mics and audio interfaces and all that stuff to different groups to sort of prop them up so that if you can find the right talent you want for your production, we can, they can be equipped and they can really professionally appear in a lot of high-end work. So I've been super proud of what Moliere and the Park has done with casts that are, like an all women version of School for Wives. Was incredible to watch, first of all, as a great take on Moliere, but also was professionally produced and it reached, a huge audience. So I think again, going back to my earlier point about how, the sort of establishment theater, for lack of a better word, sort of turning its nose at virtual theater and saying this isn't real theater, and critics saying, this doesn't qualify as, as the live arts. It's something, that needs to live in its own box and is sort of beneath us and it's below us to even try. Them sort of getting out of the way so that everybody else can kind of come into the spotlight. I think has done a lot to highlight a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion subjects within the theater community as a whole. And I'm glad that we're able to facilitate a lot of that with our technology and the productions we work on.
Fantastic. Next question.
Just real quick to those in the chat, I will call that comment from Chris out live, even though you can't put it into the questions. From an anonymous attendee, are you being pulled more and more to produce media, or does live theater still have your heart and focus? Where do they intersect?
That's a really tough question because in a large respect, we've focused on, especially in the last quarter, making sure that we have strong offerings for media and production. But part of the reason I'm doing that is so that I can take a lot of that back to the theater community. And I got to say, it was one of the most emotional moments for me to watch conversations with Tony Mobley a couple of weeks ago, and to see Zoomosc used in an academic theater project, Zoomosc 4 with all the broadcast features turned on, and to see those used for the arts. While I was over in Novato with Alex working on this huge broadcast system, it brought all the meaning back for me. Why do we do this? That's why we do it. So that's all. That's where my heart is. Sorry, media guys, but that's where that's where I'm planted. But we know that there's a symbiotic relationship between these disciplines, and it's sort of a new thing, and it's something that's why we're called liminal, by the way, is because we exist in that space between theater and technology and broadcast and all of that and art. We're sort of we sort of try to defy definition as best as we can, but we do think that when these groups work together, it's mutually beneficial. We're able to do things like build an RTMP streamer plugin for Isadora, right, which is sort of built for the benefit of the arts, because broadcast professionals, we're going to use our hardware encoders and all that stuff, right? But we can then, provide really thorough testing, and as we did in After Hours the other day. And like those are when we start to merge these communities and bring them together, we learn their tricks of the trade, which can help us achieve some really out of the box ideas for our professional productions. And we can take the tried and true established workflows, lower the barrier to entry, and then provide them to be resources that are understandable for academic theaters, community theaters, and the like, to be able to produce even more creative work in that space.
We all swim in the same pond.
Sure do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
amazing.
this is the last question.
That was the last question, but I do want to say that Chris Clark suggested to Andy, focus on mentoring. How can you recruit a cohort of 10 to 12 to spend 6 months jumping into the deep end of the pool with Andy, helping with projects as they can, and bringing their own ideas and passions to the table, connecting with one another in relationships that could last a lifetime. So that was a pretty awesome idea. I just wanted to make sure everybody heard.
Chris, you wanted to say some more about that? Go ahead.
Only that Andy is obviously a teacher, as well as an actor, artist, and engineer. And I just want to put in my 5 votes for a little more emphasis on the teaching function, especially as it's cast in mentoring, because mentoring happens when you're actually doing something together with your mentees, rather than different than lecturing and so forth. So it's not so much a transfer of your knowledge and identity to another as it is the opportunity to, it's more like adding wonderful ingredients to a collective stew or soup. It not only changes the totality of the soup, but it changes each of the ingredients. Each of the contributors becomes different and a better person in a way, a more capable person for doing good as a virtue of that mingling and interaction and collective focus on getting something done to make the world a better place.
And something that I think Salo could be able to speak to, because he's been around it for longer than I have, is the sort of the devising revolution in community theater over the past couple of years, is exactly that subject. But it's the bend of it in the arts, where devising as a model for theater companies or ensembles, where it's not, I'm the lighting designer, you're the video designer, I'm the director, you're the author of the script and all that stuff, you're the playwright, right? You're the cast, you're the crew. But it's everybody, we're together and we're creating something together in real time, where nobody's teaching anybody else anything specifically. Rather, it's the entire sort of like everything, throwing everything into the pot and letting it stew together, right? And cross marinate. That's been a huge revolutionary movement in theater in the past, 20, 30 years. And I know that's, I totally agree.
Possibly longer.
Probably quite longer as well. But I think it's super exciting. And and that's one of the things that I'm excited about with After Hours, to be honest with you, with the Office Hours group. I try to, as much as possible, jump in there when I'm working on something, just to be there. And to see like who's around. Like Jonas helped me build something in AWS the other day, and I try to help with some of the chat bot when I'm available. And I think that that there's a way to do an open office that's less like an open office and more like a walk-in devising workshop. And I think that if we can hit that balance correctly in the format of something like After Hours, we could really open up some powerful synergies. I will say I want to express gratitude to my team at Liminal, who has been that hive for us, and we've had some really great people that we've worked with. They've made incredible contributions, and we do try to think of everybody like, as being on the same page. Like I'll have like, Richard, who helps write the Mac version of Zoomosc, will flat out tell me I'm being stupid when I have a certain API request. And like, normally you don't tell your boss that, but I like encourage it because I want the honest opinions of people who are like actually have their hands dirty in this and are using it. And pretty much everybody who works at Liminal uses it in their own their own way for different parts of production. So my hat's off to Jonathan and Nolan and Kala and Benjamin and Richard and Ashley and everybody who works for us. They whether they're a contractor or an employee, they've been part of the melting pot, and their identity is as much stamped into the products that we make as my own. So I'm really grateful to them.
Fantastic.
Every day is a cast party.
Thank you, Andy, so much. Just thank you so much. This has been a great experience, and so the last several instances of conversations with Tony Mobley, I've been kind of trying to summarize my guests, and so Tony Mobley says, "A brilliant young mind with the heart to match." And I think, sir, that is you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for embracing the community that you are a part of and embracing the communities that you're not a part of, but you still made an effort to make a difference for those people. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm glad that I can count you as a friend. I really appreciate this. I'm thankful to the panel and everybody who's here. Thank you so much. I really didn't know what conversations was going to be, but I did know that it was going to be an opportunity for people who don't look alike, who don't sound alike, who have different religions, to be able to talk to one another. We use technology as the framework in which to talk, but more importantly, it's about talking. It's about the conversation. And so I'm thankful that we've had now 8 fantastic episodes. And so I'm looking forward to the episodes that are coming. This has just been an amazing journey. Happy to be here. Happy to be able to do this. And so I invite those who are watching on YouTube. We're going to hang out for about 30 minutes. We're not going to take up all of Andy's time after this conversation ends. We're going to hang out for about 30 minutes. YouTube will be turned off. We ask you to come into the Zoom. You can come into the Zoom, talk in the chat, turn your cameras on, join the panel, do whatever you would like just to hang out. This is a fellowship hour. It's a time of relaxing, letting your hair down, unbuttoning your shirt, whatever you need to do. We're going to hang out for about 30 minutes. And so we're going to talk about some of the technical parts of the chat, the magic chat, and some other things. So we're going to ask you to come now into the Zoom meeting to do that. Again, we want to thank everybody. Before we end, I just want to lift up a couple of special thanks. So the global community, family, and friends, thank you so much. I want to lift up my wife, Kimberly Mobley, who has allowed me this opportunity to hang out with you guys and to have conversations with Tony Mobley. I want to thank Alice Lindsay and the office hours members, the DVE store, Video 360, webcam. Why do I mention them every week? I'm not using the Video 360 camera anymore. I'm using an iPhone as my primary camera right now. I lift them up because what? What did they do? At the beginning of the pandemic, they made sure teachers had webcams. So I will continue to lift them up because they did not have to do that. They donated cameras, webcams to teachers who needed them. And the way things are going, teachers may need an additional donation in the future. So I want to lift them up. I have a fantastic website, and the gentleman who created that website, his name is Ken Jordan. He is a very mild-mannered person who tells me all the time that he has more work than he can do, but he has made sure that Conversations with Tony Mobley has a first-class website. It is as good as anybody's website in the world. And we participate with people all over the world. And this gentleman lives in the UK. And so, Mr. Ken Jordan, thank you so much. Conversations with Tony Mobley will continue next week. We have a new friend, Sarah During. She is a public education administrator. She will be sharing with us next week in Conversations with Tony Mobley. And so the last thing is Tony Mobley, Conversation with Tony Mobley is trying to get some likes and some subscribe. Hey guys, listen, I'm only at about 80-something subscribers. If you like this content, go and like and subscribe. Not for Tony Mobley, but for the guests that we have. The caliber of guests are also attracted by the number of subscribers and likes that the host has. So,
look what he had to put up with today. Give him some subscribes. He can do better than this.
And so I want to lift up a couple of websites before we end the YouTube. So andycarluccio.com and again, liminalet.com. Those are Andy's website. And again, Andy is participating in after hours with the office hours community. He's doing prolific YouTube videos. Check out the YouTube Liminal stream for he's constantly updating the videos, so you want to check those out. And so with that, I'm going to say good night to everybody who is watching and listening. And my good friend Hasmat Jagar has recently left, but he was here, Andy, so I want you to know that. So it was like 4 a.m. his time in Cape Town, South Africa. So we're going to say good night to everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Andy. And we're going to just be fellowshipping for the next 30 minutes. Take care, everyone. And I need Marcus. Oh, I have to mention this. Just met my new friend, Marcus, from Trinidad. He cut the show tonight. This is his first time cutting a conversation with Tony Mobley. He has been a part of After Hours. Marcus, tell us how long you've been a part of Office Hours and the community. I know you recently turned your camera on.
A couple of days actually, but I've been following for months.
Fantastic.
So I know all these guys before they knew me.
Fantastic, and thank you, Marcus, for cutting this show. Thank you again, Andy.